Carolina. I really did. I was at the airport in Charlotte, and a flight at the exact same time was leaving for Greenville, South Carolina at a gate E3, and the flight to North Carolina was at gate E33. And I made it all the way through the line for the South Carolina gate before they stopped me on the gangway and said I was going to the wrong city. So yeah, so much for being number 2 in my class. Well, it's really wonderful to be here today, and I'm going to ask you to do something quite dangerous immediately after finishing a meal, which is I'd like you to close your eyes. I'm going to take you someplace quite different. So imagine a day like today, a little bit cool outside. You're breathing in what feels to be much thinner air. They're at 7,000 feet above sea level, higher than Denver. You're wearing a uniform. It's stiff like cardboard, hasn't been washed in weeks. On your head is a bulky helmet, wearing 20 pounds of body armor. You can feel it weighing down on your shoulders, constricting your chest. There's dust in the air, dust everywhere. On your uniform, on your boots, coating the window of the Humvee you're riding in. And as you look through the window of that Humvee, through the thick, bulletproof glass, in front of you, you see the jagged ridge, which you know is Pakistan. Below you, some 200 feet below, looks like ants at first. You realize there's your soldiers making their way across the rocky terrain. The radio crackles. Can't quite make out what they're saying. Then you hear 3 quick shots. They crack across the valley, and that entire ridge opens up like the 4th of July with fireworks in every direction. You push open that heavy Humvee door, race across the next 20 feet of parched ground, and find the only cover you can see behind a scarred tree trunk. Your radio operator follows close behind you, connected like an umbilical cord wherever you go. Bullets snap by, casings tumble off the side of the Humvee as the machine gun opens up. You hear RPGs explode. You don't know if the next one is headed your way. And over the radio, you hear words that stop you cold. O'Neill is KIA. The world stops. Sound rushes out. And when the sound turns back on, you see your radio operator open his mouth. And he says 5 words. What do we do now, sir? Open your eyes. So what I'd like to talk with you about today is how you prepare to answer that question. What is it about the experience that I've had and so many others have had to prepare for the moments in their lives, whether in the military or outside the military, when you're asked to lead, when you're asked to answer that question, and to give the best response you can with limited information under extreme stress? Because we're all leaders in some way, at some point in time, even if you haven't been to date. So my journey began at West Point as a scared 17-year-old driving with my family from Rhode Island to West Point, New York. I said goodbye to my parents in a crowded gymnasium, and my life changed forever. I had no experience of the military before that. I'd come across West Point after a chance road trip with a high school classmate, a military brat. And they teach you so much in the first day at West Point. It reminds me of the old book, everything I learned in life I learned in kindergarten. And in many ways, I felt like much of what I learned in the military, I learned those first 6 weeks of cadet basic training. So they call the first day at West Point our day for reception day. And one of the distinct memories I have of our day is stepping up to the cadet in the red sash. So when you're reporting for duty for the first time, there's a upperclassman wearing a starched white uniform with a red sash, looking very serious, and you're wearing this ridiculous outfit of a new cadet, black shorts, gray top with your name emblazoned on it, black dress socks pulled up all the way, and low quarter shoes. Patently ridiculous. And this should be a very simple exercise. All you need to do is to step up to this line in front of the cadet in the red sash, raise your right arm in a salute, and say, "New Cadet Mullaney reporting to the cadet in the red sash for the first time as ordered, sir." And I think I went through that routine about 10 times before I got it correct. I saluted with my left hand, I got the words out of order, I called the sir a ma'am, just about everything you could do wrong. And they teach you these 4 responses as a new cadet to whatever you're asked to do. Yes, sir. No, sir. No excuse, sir. Sir, I do not understand. And it's that third response, the no excuse, sir, that's the most important one. Because from day one in the military, whether it starts at West Point or basic training somewhere else, is that you are responsible for your actions, and you'll still be responsible for the actions of your teammates and the team you might lead. It's the no excuse, sir. The second day at West Point, I woke to Guns N' Roses' Welcome to the Jungle blasting through the speakers of the barracks, and our squad leader screaming for me and my 2 roommates and the rest of our squad to assemble outside in the hallway with a canteen full of water ready to begin our physical exercises. And we jumped out of our beds. I don't think any of us slept that night. Sort of got into our gym clothes, out in the hallway, standing at attention, ready to start. I'm hoping day 2 will be better than day 1. And the squad leader, as he inspects, stops in front of me, and I know something is wrong because he's staring at my shirt. And I look down, and I realize that I have my shirt on backwards. My name Mullaney is on my right scapula instead of my left breast. And what was most compelling was that the squad leader didn't dress me down. He turned to my roommate, and he asked my roommate why I was in the wrong uniform. Implied, it was the roommate's responsibility. It was each of our responsibility to check on each other. I am my brother's keeper. And that was the second lesson in accountability. One of the other experiences of plebe year was going through cadet boxing. So every new cadet, every cadet at West Point has to take boxing classes. I was a wrestler, not a boxer. In wrestling, you sort of lean in like this. In boxing, when you do that, you get hit with an uppercut and you get knocked out. Now, I was very energetic and very enthusiastic about boxing, but very, very bad. And I went 0-4 in my graded boxing matches, each time sort of being laid out and woken up by smelling salts in the training room. And at the end of this course, the instructor, this sort of steel cable belted biceps special operations veteran, gave me my grade, and he gave me a B-. And I was like, generally I've been an A student, and I was taken back by the B- because I had actually expected a much lower grade. How can you go 0-4 and still pass? And I asked the instructor, who I don't understand, sir, and he said, "You fall gracefully." And more importantly, you got back up every time. And the reason they teach you boxing is not because you're likely to ever find yourself in a boxing match with a Taliban foot soldier in Afghanistan. They teach you boxing because where you will find yourself time and time again in the military, and even more frequently outside the military, is being knocked down and being able to get back up and fight again. And one of my favorite quotes from Samuel Beckett, the Irish playwright, is try again, fail better. And I've tried throughout my life to fail better and to get back up whenever I'm knocked down. I'll share one more story from West Point that's relevant. As I made this journey of accountability, for personal accountability to team accountability to leadership accountability. Camp Buckner is an advanced field training for rising sophomores at West Point. It's like summer camp with machine guns. You show up this bucolic Lake Popolopen outside of West Point, and you go through training. So I got assigned to lead a squad of these rising sophomores through advanced field training, and it was my first taste of leadership at West Point, and I loved it. I loved taking my squad to the field to practice artillery, to learn how to do land navigation, to disassemble and reassemble their weapons, to learn about the different weapon systems, to transfer so much of what I learned in my first 2 years to this group and to inspire them to make the most of their remaining time at West Point. I love the camaraderie. I love the opportunity to set a vision and inspire and motivate a team towards that vision. And I loved when the going got tough and it was raining and miserable outside, and to rally the troops and actually sort of turn that misery into laughter and friendship. And at the end of every one of these days at Camp Buckner, when we were in the field, you'd sort of circle up, the chow truck would come, you'd sort of scoop out your mystery meat and macaroni and cheese, find a seat under a tree, and eat. And the responsibility of the squad leader is to do your foot check for the day. So you ask everyone in the squad to take their boots off and their socks off, and you're supposed to go around foot by foot and make sure that the feet are in good working order, since they're your sort of personal mobility technology. And as you inspect the feet, you learn this very important lesson about leadership, which is leadership smells a lot like blue cheese. It's about caring enough for the people you lead to literally hold their blistered, smelly, decomposing feet, to care for those who need their blisters healed, to put moleskin on, to roll up your sleeves and do the hard work. And you realize that leadership isn't a privilege of the type that comes with lots of rank and benefits. It is a different kind of privilege. It's a privilege of responsibility. It's the privilege to serve those who are under your command. I left West Point not sure exactly where I might apply those leadership skills. I knew I was going to Ranger School as an intermission before continuing my education at Oxford. I was really excited about this challenge, but also frankly nervous. Ranger School is one of the tougher courses that the Army has to offer. It can last anywhere from 60 to 100 plus days, depending on your learning aptitude. I was on the 100 plus day side of that bell curve. And over the course of Ranger School, you average roughly 3 hours of sleep a night, march something like the equivalent distance from Boston to Philadelphia, and are generally put to the test day after day after day with little predictability, put into situations where you're leading your peers who are sleepwalking, exhausted, and not particularly motivated by the repetitive missions you're doing day after day. And when I went through Ranger School in the summer of 2000, it was before we had the specter of war on the horizon. And so it was particularly difficult for the Ranger instructors to convince us as students that the skills we were learning would in any way be applicable to our careers in the military. And my most profound memory from Ranger School happened in the first phase in Fort Benning, Georgia. And we were maybe 2 days into a multi-day field exercise, 2 days without sleep. And we'd finally gotten to our patrol base after a long march in the middle of the night, somewhere in the backwoods of southwestern Georgia. And our squad of 10 got into a perimeter of facing outward, and we sort of counted off, and the even numbers got to sleep for the night, and the odd numbers had to stay awake on guard until the next rotation. I drew the lucky number to go to sleep, but I woke up maybe 10 minutes later to machine gun fire, and like everyone else in our squad, I fired off into the dark, only to realize after a couple of minutes that no one was firing back. And it turned out that the ranger instructor had snuck right past our sleeping guard and pulled the trigger on her own machine gun, and did this as a lesson to teach us to stay awake. And ranger instructor calls to the end of the exercise, says, "We're going for a walk," words you never want to hear in ranger school. And we hoisted our 80 to 100-pound rucksacks on our back, and we started walking down one of these fire breaks with the moon casting shadows longer and longer as they got closer to dawn. And several miles into this march until dawn, he pulls us aside, lines us up like suspects in a police lineup, and he asks each ranger, "Why are you here? Why are you here? Why are you putting yourself through ranger school?" And the answers were fairly predictable. The young privates, my platoon sergeant made me. The lieutenants, wanted this challenge, sir. And the instructor wasn't satisfied with any of these answers. He says, "Rangers, you're not here for any of those reasons. You're here for the men you're going to lead. The ranger tab you wear is for them. I don't care if you're tired or sick or lonely. I don't care if you have a rock in your boot. I don't care if you haven't taken a shower in a week. This isn't about you." 4 simple words. This isn't about you. And I'll never forget those words, and I said them to myself many a time when I felt self-pity, when I didn't feel like I had the strength to keep going on, because someone else was counting on me. A week after I finished Ranger School, I went to Oxford University, a very different place than Fort Benning, Georgia. And while it was gray and dark and damp like West Point, it had a very different educational style. It was about sort of answering my own questions, about asking questions in the first place. I had no classes my first year. It was like someone handed me a library card to one of the world's greatest universities and said, "Make the most of it." And I was in command of my education with no responsibility other than to myself. A situation I often felt conflicted about, particularly as 9/11 happened at the beginning of my second year at Oxford. But I dedicated myself to gaining as much knowledge as I could from that experience, from this opportunity to learn from a very different cohort of leaders, classmates who would go on to prestigious careers in medicine, politics, law, academia, and other fields. To understand from each of them how they each wanted to fight the world's fight, in Cecil Rhodes's words, to have impact in the world. And I began to think about how I would want to have impact in the world as an Army officer and beyond. I built incredible friendships through travel around the world. I learned a lot about ambiguity, a skill that would be quite important as I arrived in Afghanistan with an unclear mission, an unknown enemy, and a hard-to-understand population we were there to protect. And I was glad that someone had taught me how to ask the right questions, to discover my passions, and to follow my interests where they might take me. Before I left for Afghanistan in the summer of 2003, more than 10 years ago, I was a platoon leader for a platoon at the 10th Mountain Division based out of Fort Drum, New York. I sat and I wrote letters to the family members of each of my soldiers, vowing that I would do everything in my power to bring them home safe. That theirs was an important mission, that each of them should be proud of their loved one wearing a uniform and raising their hand and writing a blank check to the government that hopefully would never be cashed in. And that fight I described earlier on Lozano Ridge turned out from a tactical perspective to have been a victory. While O'Neill was killed in action, some 60 plus members of Al-Qaeda, Taliban affiliated groups were killed in a 12-hour firefight. After I snapped to and answered Private Howe's question, what do we do now? We managed to have a successful fight. But the hardest challenge of leading wasn't leading in that firefight, it was getting back up the next morning. Wandering across the courtyard of our fire base and seeing the impromptu memorial that someone had put there for O'Neill, a rifle bayoneted into a cardboard box with his helmet on top and his dog tags dangling from the trigger well, a couple folding metal chairs set in front of it. And I sat down on one of those chairs, I put my head in my hands and I prayed and I cried. And one of my squad leaders sat down next to me and we prayed together and we cried. And the entire squad that day, entire platoon grieved. We had a memorial service for Private O'Neill, and we learned more about his final moments on Lozano Ridge, how his last words were to ask how the rest of the squad was as he slowly bled out. I learned much later that O'Neill had joined the Army when he was 19 because he had always wanted to go to West Point, but he didn't want to miss the chance to serve in Afghanistan for spending 4 years at the academy. And so he enlisted, like his dad had done in Vietnam 30 years before. And how proud his parents were of the sacrifice he made, and how much he taught me and the other members of my platoon and inspired us in the lives we lived after that day. But after that memorial service, we went back on patrol because there isn't really a pause button in combat. And despite all of our fears and anxieties, despite wanting nothing more than to curl up on the cot and sleep away the rest of our tour, we got back in our Humvees and we went back out. Because it isn't about you. Several years later, I had the opportunity to serve at the Pentagon, working on Afghanistan and Pakistan policy, and I learned that another one of my soldiers had fallen in combat in Iraq, and it was to be buried at Arlington National Cemetery, a few hundred yards away from where my office was at the Pentagon. And so I went over to Arlington Cemetery that day, and I saw several of my soldiers, and we'd gotten one last convoy from the funeral location to the burial. And we stood in the back of all the folded chairs where his family and his wife stood. And I watched the old guard hand the folded flag to Specialist White's wife. And when you hand over a flag in a memorial ceremony, you say, on behalf of a grateful nation. And I ask myself every day, what does it mean to be a grateful nation? How are we worthy of these sacrifices? What do we owe those and their family members who've made so many sacrifices on our behalf? And a few things come to mind. I think one of the ways we honor those sacrifices is by living lives that are congruent with those values that the military espouses, where we think about each other, where we have a responsibility to our team, whether that team means our family, our classmates, our communities, lives of integrity and honor, lives of service in some way. Another thing that comes to mind when I think about how we demonstrate our gratitude as a country is the way we help veterans transition back into the classroom or transition out into the civilian workforce. I spend a fair amount of my time outside of work helping veterans transition into technology. And it's not easy. And I applaud all of you for working so diligently on this because it's critical. As we transition responsibility in Afghanistan and more veterans come home, some hang up their uniforms and they are looking to serve their communities in new ways. And I feel it's all of our obligation to give them the resources they need to help themselves to serve in a new capacity. For some, that's education. For others, it's training. In my world, it's often as simple as helping a veteran to rewrite their resume so that it's understandable by many of my colleagues who've never met anyone in the military, don't know the difference between a Silver Star and an Army Commendation Medal, who don't know what it means to lead a squad in combat for hundreds of missions. And will ask, in all sincerity, whether I think they could lead a small team of 4 or 5 in a civilian capacity. And I say, deadlines don't mean the same thing to somebody who served in Afghanistan as they do in your world. If you can think of a hard mission, this person will be up for it. The title of my book, The Unforgiving Minute, comes from a poem written by Rudyard Kipling. Rudyard Kipling's son went missing in action in World War I, and Kipling had written this poem for him. In the last stanza of If, he says, "If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And, which is more, you'll be a man, my son." And I think that's an interesting definition of what it means to grow up, to be able to fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run. And so I challenge you and challenge the students you work with to fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run. So that one day, if you or they are asked, what do we do now? They have the right answer. Thank you.